Hey everyone, welcome back to Rationable Interviews. Today we're going to be digging into the past and especially with the focus of Ancient Apocalypse, the Netflix series, which basically says or claims that there was an ancient civilization that helped the rest of the world kind of rise in technology, but was suddenly lost for some reason. And it is by and it's basically the proponent is one guy called Graham Hancock, who is an archaeological outcast. But I wanted to shed some real light on this, some actual factual archaeological and anthropological light. Anthropological. All right. I got that pronunciation right. And for that, we have Dr. Andre Costopoulos, who is right now teaching at the University of Alberta in Canada. And he's joining us to tell us a little bit more about what goes right and what goes wrong with Ancient Apocalypse. Dr. Costopoulos, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to Rationable Interviews.
Yeah, thank you. It's really good to be here and to be chatting with you.
It's my pleasure completely. So, could you once again, tell us a little bit more about your background? What is it you're doing exactly? All of that, all the good stuff, academia.
Sure. I teach archaeology in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Alberta here in Edmonton in Alberta, Canada. And until recently, I was Vice Provost and Dean of Students at the university, but I'm done with being a dean now, and I'm going back to the classroom into my lab and doing all the stuff for which I became an academic in the first place. So it's always good.
So, what were the kind of interests that really got you into archaeology and anthropology in the first place? How did that happen?
So it's interesting because it was actually a television program. So Ancient Apocalypse was a Netflix series, and lots of people are watching it. And I think I first became interested in archaeology because of a program called The Ascent of Man. That was a program in the 1970s that was done by a Polish mathematician called Jacob Bronowski.
Oh,
And I think it came out in maybe 73, 74, around there. And it was on television. I would have been about 4 years old, 5 years old at the time. And when I was watching it, I remember watching it every time that it was on. And I would ask my mother, like, when is that thing on? I probably caught it by chance one afternoon. It was on public television here. He talked about human evolution, and he talked about archaeology in the past and how we became us, right? Where do we come from? And how did we get to live in these very complex, elaborate societies? And I was really interested in that. So that's really when I decided to become an archaeologist at that time, because of that program, The Ascent of Man. And so there are probably some kids out there the same age watching television programming now on archaeology and deciding that they want to be archaeologists.
I totally relate to that. When I was a kid, they used to show Cosmos, Carl Sagan's
Yeah,
Cosmos,
of course. Yeah.
on our national TV, which was pretty much one channel back then, I think. And that's what got me interested in science. And it's Carl Sagan again who's kind of got me into skepticism as well. So
Yeah.
he's been a guiding light of sorts. So I totally relate to that. So in your career, have you made any significant discoveries, or what are the most interesting archaeological sites you might have been to?
I work mostly in the north. I've worked in northern Finland and northern Quebec here in Canada. I study human adaptation to environmental change in the long term, so past 7,000 years or so. And the other area that I study a great deal is the application of agent-based computer simulation for testing hypotheses about the past and hypotheses about evolutionary processes. So I study human evolution both from the point of view of looking at how archaeological sites change over time as the environment changes around people in the north. And also I try to test hypotheses using simulation about how humans have changed in the past.
Wow, that sounds very interesting indeed.
I think so. I think it's very interesting. It's pretty fascinating.
Absolutely. History has unfortunately been my weakest subject, but I've always preferred looking at more of prehistory. And I've been always kind of interested in that and kind of evolution of man and from other primates and the start of, I mean, of course, but the thing is, I'm a complete noob at all of this. So I have absolutely, I was thinking
Oh,
like making an entire episode of debunking ancient apocalypse. And I was then, and 5 seconds later, I was like, I do not have the weight I can pull on this. So I need to find someone who really knows what he's talking about.
well, we're all learners, right? So we're all, no matter how much, whether we're a professor of archaeology or somebody who's just approaching it for the first time, the questions don't change. We're all asking the same questions, and they're big questions. What changes is how we approach the questions and what baggage we bring to, and what tools and experience we bring to trying to answer the questions. But we're all learners and we're all asking the same questions.
Indeed. And I think today's episode is going to be one hell of a learning experience. At
Ah,
least.
I'm hoping so. Let's try to make it like a good learning experience for everyone.
Absolutely. So, what was, when you watched Ancient Apocalypse, what were the thoughts that first came to your mind?
So my
Did you
first
start
reaction,
it with a sense of skepticism, or would you just enter it with an open mind and see what was going on?
I'm a scientist, so I'm interested in evaluating claims.
Yeah.
I always start from the point of view of testing hypotheses, evaluating claims. So that's how I approach everything. And that's how I approach Ancient Apocalypse as well. I mean, I started watching it knowing who Graham Hancock was, and I know his previous work. I know his, what is it called, America Before, and Fingerprints of the Gods, and all that stuff. I mean, I've been familiar with his work for a long time, since the 1990s. Mars stuff as well, because I grew up also a bit of a UFO buff,
Oh,
and
yeah. Same here, man. Same
uh,
here.
I grew up hoping that the Atlantis story was true, and but always from the point of view of evaluating claims. And
Mm.
so I started watching Ancient Apocalypse with the same outlook. And when somebody makes a claim, I don't really worry necessarily about where the claim comes from or how it was arrived at. What I worry about is what I do with the claim. How do I test it? How do I determine whether it's true or not? Or how likely is it to be true also? Right. So that's one of the important things to remember when you're watching something like Ancient Apocalypse, or looking at Ancient Aliens, which is another popular series on television. Or I don't know if people watch Curse of Oak Island in India, but it's a very popular series in many places about also.
Ancient aliens?
No, it's more about, there's an island
Oh,
in
okay.
Canada and Nova Scotia where there's rumored to be a buried treasure. And there's this program about searching for the buried treasure on that island. So it's also pseudo-archaeology. But anyway, so there are lots of those programs on television. And the iconic question of the pseudo-archaeology genre, is it possible or could it be? Right? And the bottom line is, when you're dealing with the past, it's very hard to say that something is impossible. So if the question is it possible? Normally the answer will be, yes, it's possible. But right,
Yeah.
the real question, the interesting one to ask, is how likely is it to be true? And is there any evidence to support the claim? So something could be true. And the example I always use is with the pyramids and aliens building the pyramids. Is it possible that aliens built the pyramids? Yeah, I guess it's possible. I can't prove that they didn't, right?
Mm.
Because I'm not there to observe the past directly. However, we do have some very good evidence that people built the pyramids. People in Egypt built the pyramids, and we have no evidence that aliens built them. So which one is more likely? And then someone might come back and say, yeah, but maybe they could have helped. Maybe people did build the pyramids, but maybe there were some aliens there who helped them. Yeah, maybe, but is there any evidence to support that? And there isn't. And is there anything that forces us to think or to conclude that they did? And there isn't. So the simplest explanation, of course, is that the people who built the pyramids were the people who lived in Egypt at the time, who left all the archaeological remains that we find, including, for example, a journal, basically documents, written document, people who were in charge of building the pyramids and who told us how they did it. So that's always when you see something like Ancient Apocalypse, that's always my first reaction. That, okay, there's a claim. Yeah, it could be true, because they're always asking, could it be that? Is it possible? Yeah, it's kind of possible, but is there any evidence to support it? Is there anything that forces us to conclude it? Is it likely? Are there better, likelier explanations for which we do have good evidence and support? Usually, yes.
And
So
usually then you apply Occam's razor and just primarily use the one which has the most evidence for it and the least number of new assumptions that one has to make.
exactly, new assumptions such as alien tractor beams, which is a pretty new assumption, right? That you have to introduce in order to explain that.
Just because I'm very curious about the pyramids, which is, I mean, it's a lot of the stuff I used to watch as a kid also,
Sure. Yeah.
built on this. So there's one documentary I found which that's basically said that the pyramids were built in alignment with or to mimic the belt of Orion
Yeah, I've seen that as well. Yes,
and
yes.
with the Milky Way as the Nile going next to it. Do you think there's any evidence to support that?
Again, it's a claim, right? It's a claim. And is it possible? Yeah, it's possible because we basically, you can't prove that it's false, but do you have to suppose that it's true? Is there anything that leads you to think that it's true? And if you take 3 points, you're going to find alignment with something in the sky. That's the problem with archaeoastronomy in a sense. There is very good archaeoastronomy out there, but there is also pseudo-archaeoastronomy. And if you're looking for alignments, and Graham Hancock goes again and again to the astronomical alignments in the series, Serpent Mound and the temples of Malta, for example, he talks about those. If you're looking for something to align anything in the sky, you're going to find something because first of all, the sky is all over the place, right? So anywhere you point, you're pointing at something in the sky.
There are a lot of dots in there.
A lot of dots, and they move around a lot. And there's a difference between, say, an alignment like Stonehenge, which is a famous one with the solstice. Fine, it's an alignment. Is it an intentional alignment? That's the other question. Yeah, there's no reason to think that it isn't, but we don't know for sure because, again, we're not there to observe the motives of the people building the place, but it's a reasonable idea. But is it anything that you Poverty Point, he uses the alignments at Poverty Point also in one of the episodes. And the alignments at Poverty Point are extremely questionable. Yeah, you can find alignments. There's enough features at Poverty Point and there are enough points in the sky that statistically you're going to find tons of alignments if you look for them. But are they intentional and are they meaningful is another question. And what would be evidence that we could use that they are intentional and meaningful? Maybe they are. I have nothing against the idea that they are. My question is, can we prove it? And is it likely or not? Yeah. And when you're about likely, you're talking about probability. So you start with, what is the probability that there are chance alignments at Poverty Point between the features on the ground and the features in the sky, the astronomical features? The probability is very high that there are alignments that occur by chance. So from there, how do you then move to investigating the possibility that there are some that are not by chance? It's a difficult problem.
Indeed. So are there a lot of ancient civilizations that actually are fascinated with the stars, with the movement of the sun? I've heard that there are lots of places which kind of like to align with the solstices and the equinoxes. So is that actually that's based in fact?
Sure. Those are the big ones, solstices and equinoxes. So the rhythms of the sun and moon phases as well. Those are the big ones. North Star in the northern hemisphere. Those are the ones that are obvious and significant. And when you're thinking about any community that has an agricultural adaptation, it makes sense that they're very concerned with tracking time. And a good way of tracking time is to worry about what the sun is doing in the sky. It's also just fascinating, right? Even if you're not dependent on agriculture, you observe what's happening in the sky, and you want to make sense of it. So it wouldn't be surprising if people all over the earth, all through human history, and I'm going back here when I say human history, I can go back 2 million years to first dispersal of Africa. And I can say people were looking at the sky and they were seeing stuff and they were noticing patterns. Now, do we have any archaeological evidence of that is a separate question. It's not surprising, and it's actually to be expected. I would expect that people were fascinated with the sky and that they tracked patterns and identified them, told stories about them, for example. But as an archaeologist, I have to work with the evidence that's in the ground. So I can have thoughts about what is likely, but then I have to look in the ground to see what I can actually demonstrate. And there's actually sometimes very little that we can demonstrate. The solstice alignments, those are pretty good because they're at a couple of points in a 360-degree circle. So the probability of having a chance alignment is low. So if you have an alignment, then okay, it has a pretty good chance of being intentional, especially if you're in a context in which you have agriculture, in which, all that stuff. But if you're talking about alignment with a certain star, because that star is somehow more significant than the others, the other billions of stars in our galaxy that we can see from here, what are the odds? The odds are good that there are chance alignments.
That's also true, but I'm just hypothesizing out there. Like, for example, Sirius, as this guy has mentioned, as Graham Hancock has mentioned, it is the brightest star in the sky.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sure that, I mean, almost there have been so many different accounts of ancient civilizations trying to understand the sky because agriculture depends on it. Even if you're a hunter gatherer, there'll be times when certain fruits are in, I guess you can call it, in bloom. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Certain animals are supposed to go into hibernation, certain other animals are coming out. And these kinds of things would be very important for those ancient civilizations to understand. And it doesn't require advanced intelligence for this. They,
As I said, I think it's very likely that people were tracking events in the sky and that they were concerned with them and that they acted on that. The problem is demonstrating it archaeologically. So if you look at the serious stuff that's related to the Temples of Malta episode, and the entrance of the temples, according to the series, are aligned with Sirius as it moves around in the sky. So, and they're aligned with its position 10,000 years ago or so, 12,000 years. One of the issues is that it does move around in the sky. And so over the past, if you look at the position of Sirius over the past 10,000 years, 12,000 years, there's a broad range of orientations that would be aligned with it. So again, the probability, how do you determine the probability that it's not a chance alignment? And same thing with the Serpent Mound. Serpent Mound alignment it's aligned, apparently, according to the series, with the position of one astronomical feature. I can't quite remember, but you can check it out, that it would have been aligned with this position 12,000 years ago, I think. But in fact, it's currently aligned with its position within about 2.5 degrees. So, and how do you measure that? Because it's not Serpent Mound kind of sinuous. It's a big feature. So try to do 2-degree alignment, try to be precise within 2 degrees. I think the alignment is basically good within the last 12,000 years, anytime that you look at it.
Yeah.
So it's within the standard error of most techniques for building stuff. So again, it could be aligned with it 12,000 years ago. It's possible. Is there a simpler explanation? Yes, simpler explanation is that it's within 2 degrees and it was built like 5,000 years ago. So that's the likely explanation.
Now, one of the things that the show starts off with, and I've listed a few questions here, and I've got some questions from viewers as well, so which we'll get to in a bit. So, global temperature plunge. This is a claim that he makes, that there was a global temperature plunge and a sudden rise in sea level between 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. Is there any evidence to support that?
Oh, yeah, that's the Younger Dryad. There was, yes, absolutely. There was massive environmental change going on at that time. You have to think, if you go back to the last glacial maximum, which is about 18 to 20,000 years ago, where I'm sitting right now in my house, there would have been about 3 kilometers of ice on top of me right now.
Okay.
At the last glacial maximum. And sea levels globally were about 125 meters lower than they are now.
My God.
So because all the ice, of course, was trapped. I mean, all the water was trapped in the ice. So it wasn't available for the precipitation cycle, and it wasn't in the oceans, it was in the glaciers. So there was lots of land exposed that is currently underwater. There were entire areas like the North Sea, for example, was what is now the North Sea between England, France, Scandinavia. It was a plain on which lots of animal herds roamed and people hunted and people lived. And there were areas like that all over the place. Continental shelf in North America, for example, it was much broader than it is now. It was exposed and people lived there. That's now all submerged. Things started warming up, and maybe 15,000 years ago or so. And then there was a quick little cold snap, you might call it, 11,000, 12,000 years ago. And during that cold snap, it was a real reversal of the warming, and it was sudden. And then there was a warm up again, and then it continued warming up until about 7,000 years ago, where it's been pretty stable ever since.
So, do we know what caused these sudden fluctuations in temperature? And by
There are
cold snap, how long was that? How long was the period, do you think?
cold snap was a few hundred years,
Okay.
uh,
Not
and
overnight.
yeah, so
Sorry.
no, by geological scale, archaeological scale, it's a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
In human terms, it's a long time.
Yes, indeed.
And that there would have been, if you think about when we think about the past 500 years, for example, that's a lot of time and a lot of history and a lot of stories and a lot of myth making and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so, but in archaeology and in geology especially, 500 years is nothing. So it's an instant. So humans went through this cold snap and adapted to it, of course, and then the climate came back to slightly warmer conditions. As all this warming was going on, the glaciers were melting. Glaciers were running into the sea and being taken up into the precipitation cycle again, and sea levels went up quite quickly. Those 125 meters were regained by about maybe 8,000 years ago. So it's fair to say that between, say, 14 and 8,000 years ago, sea levels went up 125 meters. But that's not the only thing that was going on, because there was also land uplift in some places. So during the Ice Age, at the height of the Ice Age, when all this ice was here in Alberta, for example, the crust of the Earth was being depressed by the weight of this ice. So in northern regions, the Earth's crust was actually depressed by the weight of ice. And as the ice melted, the Earth's crust started rebounding like a spring.
Wow.
And so in some places you had the sea level going up or the coastline receding, the sea level was going up. In other places, the rebound of the crust was faster than the rise of the sea level. So in the north, for example, in northern Europe, in Siberia, in northern North America, the coastline is actually receding because the Earth is going up so fast because it's rebounding like a spring. So you had some places where the coast was moving in, some places where it was moving out. It was a very turbulent time. And humans, this was happening within human experience. So you could have, and it's still happening today, in some regions where I've worked, like in the James Bay area in northern Canada, people see within a couple of generations, they see the coast moving, the coast receding, because the Earth is still rebounding. So you could be walking through an area with a hunter, for example, a tree hunter, who will tell you, oh, my grandfather used to fish here, and now it's land. So humans lived through that and had to adapt to it. It was a very rapid environmental change compared to what we're seeing now. And it
Not
all
considering
happened.
climate change, of course.
Yeah. And some of it was, for example, some of it was very sudden. Some of it was catastrophic. So when the glaciers were melting, these enormous lakes, proglacial lakes formed. One of them, Lake Agassiz, covered most of eastern North America and emptied quite suddenly when the ice broke. When the ice dam that was keeping it in broke, it emptied very suddenly. So there were catastrophic events, and they talk about one of them in Ancient Apocalypse they talk about the Scablands in Washington State. That was one of those. But there were many of them around the Earth, many of them around the world going on for a couple of thousand years. You had these emptying of proglacial lakes that were very sudden, very violent. In the series, Graham Hancock says, well, it's because of this meteor or comet or asteroid that struck the Earth and melted all the ice and then flooded everywhere. We actually have very good evidence of these punctual events, of these repeated flooding events due to, you've got all this ice melting. You don't need an asteroid to explain floods when you've got the Earth warming up and these massive glaciers melting and these lakes emptying catastrophically. So again, this is an example of, do you need the explanation that they give you in Ancient Apocalypse to explain what we see in the geological and archaeological record? In this case, clearly we don't need the asteroid. The other thing that's interesting about that asteroid claim and that sudden flood and et cetera, is that if it was a cataclysm that destroyed that ancient civilization that Graham Hancock is positing, it was a very selective destruction because it destroyed only that advanced Ice Age civilization. And you look in the archaeological record, we find at the same time period plenty of archaeological evidence of how humans were living back then. They were hunter-gatherers, they were living all over the earth and building settlements and making stone tools and making all kinds of stuff that we find in the ground.
Yeah.
So mysteriously, the asteroid and the resulting flood destroyed only the traces of that advanced civilization, didn't destroy the rest of the archaeological evidence of how humans were living, and we're finding it all over the place. So that's mysterious to me, and that's difficult to explain for someone who wants to use that explanation.
So these global flood myths, there is truth to them for sure, but there might be more localized floods instead of one massive global one.
Localized, yeah, they were localized, but they were pretty
Large scale, but
large
relatively.
scale, and they covered large areas of the globe, let's say. I mean, when you're talking about an event that affects all of Eastern North America, that's a big area. The Mediterranean, the Black Sea had these kinds of events. So it was big areas that were being affected quite suddenly. But people at the time, human adaptation to the Earth at the time was quite low density populations and very mobile, moved around with their game, for example, or with the resources that they hunted and gathered. And so it affected them in ways that are very different than how it would affect us if it happened today. Because today, of course, we're not as mobile. If you want to move somewhere, somebody has to let you. So if the sea level goes up even a few centimeters today, it's a catastrophe for you. It could be a catastrophe for you. If the sea level goes up 125 meters 10,000 years ago, you go where your subsistence is.
Yeah, just head for higher ground as best as possible and hope for the best. So, okay, so the global flood myths do hold up to scrutiny.
So the global flood myths, it's not surprising that there are flood myths all over the place, because some of them may very well be, I have no problem with the idea that some of them are handed down for 10,000 years, and of course they change over time, they're modified, but I have no problem with the idea that they reflect something real. I mean, those are such obvious traumatic, catastrophic events for humans that I'm not surprised that they're preserved in storytelling.
How about the pyramids that we find all over the world? So many different civilizations, especially Central and South America. We've definitely got them in Egypt, as we all know.
Sure.
Some are said to be in China as well. So how closely related are these? Or are they just...
There's a very good, simple structural explanation for those. When you look at similarities in the archaeological record around the world, you have two main kinds of explanations that are available to you. Either it's diffusion, so it comes from a single source and then it spreads from that source. And that was actually in archaeology, that was a very widespread kind of assumption, especially in 19th century, early 20th century archaeology. There was a lot of diffusion. People were looking for the source of something. If they saw commonalities around the world in the archaeological record, they would look for the source and try to track the spread of something. Because the assumption, I guess, was that invention is expensive and it's rare. So innovation is rare and it's costly. And so if you see an innovation somewhere, it probably comes from somewhere else. In other words, the other explanation is a structural explanation, in that if you put similar humans in similar conditions with similar challenges, they're going to find similar solutions. And the assumption there is that innovation is actually a feature of human adaptation, that humans innovate all the time and that it's not that rare. And so pyramids, if you want to build something big and impressive, the simplest thing that you can do, and the first thing you'll think of probably, is to pile up a bunch of stones. And if you pile up a bunch of stones, you get a pyramid. So it's basically, so the structural explanation there is that it's the likely outcome. A pyramid is the likely outcome of wanting to build something big. And people build something big when they want to make a statement, for example, or when they want to build community, right? When somebody wants to say, we did this together, we all belong together, we're all part of the same society, we're all the same effort. So we're going to build this thing together. Or another potential explanation is, I'm more important than you are. I have something bigger than you. Here's my pyramid. Look at it. Right? So there are many possible explanations that don't involve diffusion, that don't involve contact between, say, Egypt and Mesoamerica. And there are many explanations that don't require survivors of an ancient civilization destroyed by an asteroid in 12,000 years ago.
Interesting. So, and there's been another claim which basically says that in order to make the pyramids in Egypt, it would have taken, according to some calculations, 600 years, whereas it has only taken 100. So it's assumed. So,
Tractor beams, that's the answer.
oh, I want to believe.
I want to, yeah, and that's part of it. That why am I a scientist? Because I have questions, and I want to find out. So yeah, I'm really interested in. I love interesting, challenging stuff, and I love science fiction, and I love all that. And I want to believe, but I want to test. I want to evaluate. I want to believe something true, right?
I watched what is it? Stargate. Oh,
yeah,
I love Stargate series.
Oh, that's a good connection between archaeology and science fiction. Anyway, to go back to your pyramids, so there are always two possible explanations. Again, you see this dichotomy: catastrophism and gradualism. It used to be called, right? And people use the Grand Canyon for. Some people say, well, the Grand Canyon can be built in two ways, right? It can be evolved in two ways. It can either be a big flood all at once, or it can be gradual water trickle over millions of years. So nobody's closer to deciding whether it's catastrophic or not. In terms of archaeology, it all comes down to how you estimate the available energy, the available labor. And that's a very difficult kind of discipline. There are attempts at evaluating how much. Some of mid-20th century archaeology, like Leslie White, for example, in the US, was very concerned with estimating the amount of energy that can be harnessed by a social group. And so he built a whole scale of that. And he thought that the human adventure was essentially the story of a gradual increase in harnessing energy and capacity to harness energy by societies. And that flows into science fiction. You have, what is it called? The Kardashev scale, I think. Yeah, exactly. Which, with the Dyson spheres and all that, that's an extension of that thinking. That you look at how much energy, you classify societies by how much energy they can harness. So measuring that in the archaeological record is extremely difficult. So here, if I have archaeological evidence that the pyramids were built in 100 years, then I would tend to suspect that we're underestimating how much energy was available. Then I would say that's a good indication that there was enough energy harnessing available in Egypt to do that within 100 years. So we have to look back at our assumptions rather than saying it's impossible because our assumptions are right and therefore aliens.
Yeah. Or magical advanced civilization.
Right. Invoking alien tractor beams to me is more complicated than concluding that our assumptions about energy available to the Egyptians are wrong. That's the simpler one of the two.
Indeed.
And we have to revise them.
And now the series has focused a lot on the myths of the civilizations that they're talking about. Now, how important is the myth part of the story to wrap around the archaeological findings and evidence?
So stories are important. Humans are inveterate storytellers, story inventors. We have stories for everything, and we invent stories for everything. So stories are important. And to me, as an archaeologist, stories are a good source of hypotheses.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
If there's an oral tradition about something, or even locally, that's a very good source of hypotheses. And I want to evaluate that. I don't want to ignore the stories. I don't want to dismiss them out of hand. Archaeology did that for a long time.
Indeed.
And archaeology said, oral tradition was unreliable. Oral tradition it's data, it's evidence, and it's a good source of ideas to test. And so it also tells us stories tell us not only about what kinds of ideas we want to test for the past, they also tell us about how people deal with their environment. How people think about their environment, how they process all the stuff that's happening to them.
Interesting.
So stories are really important. And I don't dismiss stories, but stories, of course, they're an evolutionary system like any other. There's modification over time and there's selection. over time of various elements of the stories.
And one must factor in human ingenuity and
Yeah,
nature.
it's imagination.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think stories are a really important source of data. I use them as an archaeologist.
And so now I was hoping to keep this for later, but I think
Oh, and sorry, the other thing I forgot, there's wisdom in stories also.
interesting.
That is important. But that's sorry, sideline. Yeah.
Yeah, passing on lessons to the next generation is
Of
it.
course.
So one thing that of course permeates this entire series is how mainstream archaeology is scared of Hancock's findings and all his revolutionary fringe ideologies and ideas. So what really happens when there is a new revolutionary finding in archaeology? Like how does the community respond?
We publish papers.
Ah,
so so yeah, that's one of the things that kind of annoys me about Graham Hancock's presentation. Yeah, I mean the
it's a very
whole
conspiracy theory kind of.
the whole idea that archaeologists are scared and are refusing to, he says sometimes, refusing to examine this possibility or whatever. What am I doing right now? We're examining possibilities. And a lot of those possibilities are examined and are evaluated. And we come to the conclusion that they're not very likely, or we come to the conclusion that there's no evidence to support them, or we come to the conclusion that there's evidence against them sometimes, that there's evidence that actually rules them out. That's rare, but it happens. So it's this whole idea about archaeologists not refusing to consider possibilities it's really nonsense, because if you were to come up with something revolutionary as an archaeologist and have good evidence and good support, publish a good finding, that's very good for you. It means probably grants in the future to continue your work. It means a better chance of getting a good job in a university. So it's if somebody discovered evidence of one of those claims, then they would absolutely not hide it. That's not how our incentive system works professionally. Our incentive system professionally works with, if you can demonstrate something, do it.
Yeah, because that's what I thought that would be the case. Because I mean, it is a science just like any other. I mean, how else would archaeology progress and have new findings?
Correct.
If it was against all new ideas, then it would just stagnate.
Right. And in a lot of the ideas presented there as new are not new on ancient apocalypse. Like, for example, the idea that Gobekli Tepe, the site in Turkey.
Oh, perfect. I was just about to come to that.
Yeah, okay. So the idea that it challenges all of archaeological wisdom, again, that's nonsense. If you go to pre-1950s ideas about the origin of agriculture and et cetera, yeah, Gobekli Tepe definitely is a big challenge. But those ideas are from the 1950s. And once sites, as more and more sites like Gobekli Tepe, not just that one, because there are a bunch, as more sites like that one were being studied and becoming known, we were getting the evidence from them. Archaeologists revised our understanding of how agriculture evolved in the light of those sites. So the idea used to be that to build something like that, you need a surplus, and you get the surplus from agriculture. So people invent agriculture, then they settle, then they build big stuff. We have a very different understanding now because of sites like that, because we realized, well, actually, people are settling before we see, people are becoming increasingly sedentary before we see evidence of big kind of intensive agriculture in the modern sense. And they're even building big stuff before that. So maybe we need to revise our understanding of how agriculture evolves. And now we have a much more, I'd say, evolutionarily based understanding that people settle because they're in an environment that allows them to. For example, the area around Gobekli Tepe, where you have lots of recurring, predictable wild resources available, and you start exploiting them, and then you start managing them. The more you manage them, the more you can become sedentary, and the bigger stuff you can build. And eventually, your management evolves into full-scale agriculture. So it's when Graham Hancock says these archaeologists, they refuse to look at these sites and acknowledge that they changed the way that they should think about agriculture. Yeah, we did that like 50 years ago. So it's a lot of the archaeology that you will hear on ancient apocalypse is 50 to 100 years old and doesn't reflect our current understanding of the human past. And our current understanding is revised from those in the light of the stuff that he says we refuse to acknowledge. So that part, sorry, I get a bit carried away on this, but that part, I find that it's, people need to know about that.
That's very interesting. So basically, Gobekli Tepe is just so it was a fertile land. There was a lot of natural resources around where people
Sure.
could just manage to go and
Great,
easily
great.
hunt in and then manage their resources effectively.
Sure.
Um,
And as you start managing them, you start essentially domesticating them. Where is the line between managing a resource and domesticating a resource? It's not a hard line. Not something that you wake up one morning and you say, I'm going to grow this grain. This grain is growing all around you. And over the generations, you go, oh yeah, we can select the grain that we like better than other grain. And we can manage, we can favor, grain grows very well here and it doesn't grow so well there. If it grew there, it would be very good for us. So let's look at why it grows here and not there. And maybe we dig a trench there to let water accumulate or something. So it's a gradual process. As I said earlier, 500 years archaeologically is not long. In human terms, it's very long.
Indeed.
So if it takes 500, 1,000, 2,000 years for agriculture to evolve in a region, that's at a human scale, that's an extremely gradual process.
Indeed. I mean, in less than 100 years, we've gone from typewriters to mobile phones. I mean, that is a huge technological leap.
Here. I have some typewriters right next to me here, but
Nice.
but I'm kind of old.
There would be.
I got some there.
Oh, wow. Those are real. Found one in Gobekli Tepe.
Yeah.
So one of the viewers did send in a question. It's like, isn't Gobekli Tepe enough evidence there was a lost civilization? And then I was wondering, was Gobekli Tepe purposely buried like they claim in the series?
So let's start with is it enough evidence? No, it's not enough evidence. In fact, it's evidence that people were living there 10,000 years ago, that they were harvesting and increasingly managing resources in the area that allowed them to live in larger groups and solve the problems that are involved in living in larger groups and more permanent and more sedentary groups. To invest in a place, right? That's building that. It means, so a population that's very mobile will probably tend to invest less energy in any one place because they're living in different places and doing different things in different places. A group that's living in one place in a mostly sedentary way, they will invest in that place. They will build for all kinds of different reasons. So there's a very, very good explanation archaeologically for Gobekli Tepe without invoking a lost civilization. Again, it comes down to how many assumptions do you need to make to explain this, right? So we don't need to make the assumption of a lost civilization to explain something like Gobekli Tepe. And then was it buried intentionally? That's a very good question. I don't know. That's something that you determine by looking at existing reports, obviously, looking at existing excavation reports and looking at doing new excavations. Having said that, it wouldn't be that surprising if it was at one point, but it doesn't have to have been. So how quickly is this burying? We keep going back to the idea of archaeological scale, geological scale versus human scale. Yeah. So if it happens in a couple of generations, then it's not necessarily intentional. If it happens in a summer, then it's intentional. And there are reasons. People destroy places all the time, right? We have evidence in the news. If we look at it all around us, like for example, Carthage is a good example. That was just destroyed by the Romans. It was leveled and salted. The earth was salted, et cetera, et cetera. We have evidence much closer to us with sites in the Middle East recently being destroyed by people. It happens. Humans do that. So if it did happen, it's not that surprising. And again, we don't need an ancient civilization to explain it.
And we don't need an absolute explanation an extraordinary explanation to
That's right.
It can happen for many.
And also, one thing with archaeology, when you're dealing with the past, studying the past is difficult because first, we're not there to observe it directly. Second, we're dealing only with the material remains of the past, and many things don't preserve. So we're dealing with partial broken, fragmentary evidence of past human behavior. And humility is extremely important in archaeology. And saying, I
Very
don't
nice.
know,
Yeah.
saying, I don't know is really important. And recognizing when you can't know. In the current state of our knowledge about this thing, I can't tell you. We can't say. And people like Graham Hancock and series like Ancient Apocalypse, sometimes they will seize on that and they'll say, oh, archaeologists don't know, therefore I'm right. Archaeologists don't know if, and therefore my explanation is right. No, we don't know. So it means we don't know whether your
Yeah.
explanation is not.
Because a lot of what Graham Hancock is, the arguments he's making is, I think I can't imagine that it could be any other way than he thinks.
Then he doesn't have a lot of imagination.
Yeah, exactly. So he's like, and a lot of it is arguments from ignorance, where he's like,
Sure.
we don't know, so therefore maybe something is being hidden, something is
Right.
mysterious.
And most of the time in archaeology, we don't know.
Yeah,
And we know in a fragmentary way, or we kind of have an idea. What we do in archaeology is that we circumscribe the universe of the possible. There's a universe of possibilities to explain any phenomenon in the past, anything that we find in the ground. And some of it we can rule out. Some of it we can say, no, that didn't happen. And then we're left with kind of a universe of possibilities. And some of it is more probable, some of it is less probable. Some of it requires more assumptions, fewer assumptions. And we try to figure that out and be very transparent about what we know, what we don't know, what we suspect, what is possible, what is likely, what is more likely, less likely. That's a lot of our job.
yeah. So a friend of mine has sent in a question which is very close to this. How can we be certain that we have the full picture of history?
We can be certain that we don't. The one thing we can be certain of is that we absolutely don't have the full picture of history and never will. We're not there to observe it. And there are too many things that don't preserve. I had a prof who used to say, yeah, beliefs don't fossilize very well. So yeah, we find stuff when we're looking at 500,000-year-old remains of human behavior. Basically, we're dealing with stone tools. Nothing else preserves. And in the state of our current technology, hopefully we can find more. We're starting to find things like DNA in soil, which is great. We're starting to find more and more organic remains, or at least evidence that there used to be organic stuff. But by and large, our interpretations of the remote past are based on stone tools. Think about everything in your life that you use that is not a stone tool. Think about everything in their lives that people 500,000 years ago used that was not a stone tool. We've got a huge missing part of their world, of their life. And we have no access to the stories they were telling each other. And we have some access maybe that we're starting to now with DNA, with some of their kinship systems, so with there's all kinds of stuff that we have very little access to, trying to reconstruct their world. We're trying to reconstruct their life. The closer you come to us in time, the more material we have to work with, but we're still missing, even if we had all of the material remains available to us, we still have all the non-material that is not available to us, and that is a huge part of human experience. So yeah, we don't know. We can test hypotheses. We can make proposals about how things worked and what happened in the past, and we can make predictions about hypotheses we need to test in order to determine whether we're getting closer or farther away from the truth. But that's all we can do about the past.
Interesting. But it is, it's such a hard, not only anthropology, which is relatively recent, but ancient archaeology and even paleontology gets harder and harder the further back you go.
Of course.
Especially when you know that even when it comes to fossils, they're so rare that it's really hard to put everything together. Like, there's so many of these creationist arguments that stem from holes in in archaeology, and at least the well-constructed arguments, the relatively better arguments, come from holes in the archaeological record. But then we have to understand that these are extremely fragile organic substances which are very hard to fossilize. And what we have found, we have to be very fortunate for. We might have and I think as time goes on, the blurry pictures of the past become crisper in certain places, but there is still a lot which needs to be discovered. And
And
science,
there will always be big holes. There
yeah,
will always be, to be an archaeologist, you have to be very comfortable with uncertainty. And I think one of the things that series like Ancient Apocalypse and Ancient Aliens and others have in common is that they are very uncomfortable with uncertainty. So
yeah,
wherever there's uncertainty or lack of knowledge, they want to fill that gap. And they have an answer, and they fill it with aliens, or they fill it with a lost civilization. And then my reaction is, okay, so that's an interesting proposal. Where's the evidence for it? And the evidence is nowhere.
mm,
Even Graham Hancock says, unfortunately, there's no evidence of this ancient lost civilization because it was all destroyed by the asteroid, which destroyed nothing else and left all other human remains intact from that, that period. But yeah, where's the evidence? Sure, it's an interesting proposal. Can I prove that there is no lost ancient civilization from the Ice Age? No, I can't prove it. What I can tell you is that you have to make a lot of weird assumptions in
mhm.
order to support that idea. One of those weird assumptions is this selective destructive asteroid, and it strains the credulity. It
The
stretches the imagination.
imagination is great, but reality
I
is,
love imagination. I use it all the time in my work because when you're thinking about the past, you have to use lots of imagination. You're confronted with puzzles in archaeology. It's sure doing archaeology is like a puzzle, but it's a puzzle in which you've never seen the cover of the box of the puzzle you're trying to do. You don't know how many pieces there are. You know that there are pieces missing, but you don't know how many. That some of the remaining pieces are broken and torn up and whatever. And you don't know how big the puzzle is. And this is how you're doing it.
man, it's a very tough study, I can tell. So just wrapping up Gobekli Tepe, I think another question that had come in, is it time to drop the notion that hunter-gatherers were as primitive as their name sounds? I think we've already kind of answered that.
Yes, I mean, hunter-gatherer has nothing to do with primitive, whatever primitive means. I think humans have always had, first of all, complex social relations and complex imaginations and et cetera, et cetera. So
And
all
problem-solving abilities. One of the things
all
that,
human societies at all times have been elaborate and complex
yeah,
in many different ways, in different ways. So how complex is the technology is only one dimension of that.
yeah,
And what we find, so I would say, if you ask any pretty much modern contemporary archaeologists if hunter-gatherers are primitive, they'll answer the same thing that I'm answering now. What do you mean? When, where, in what sense primitive, etc. So again, going back to, yeah, if you go back 100 years in archaeological theory, Graham Hancock is reacting to that, and he's correct. He's right in having that reaction to 100-year-old archaeology. But that was a long time ago, and we've learned a lot since then, and we've changed our models and our conclusions and our assumptions based on all that new data that we found. One interesting thing is that often Graham Hancock will say, on the one hand, he says archaeologists are refusing to consider this, and then on the other hand, he says archaeologists discovered X, Y, Z. So all the stuff all these revolutionary ideas he's talking about are based on archaeological discoveries made by archaeologists.
yeah. That is a trend that kind of that I've seen in other aspects of pseudoscience as well. Not only filling in parts that we are ignorant about, like for example, what caused the Big Bang is where a lot of people kind
Sure.
of go in there. What is dark energy? Is it God, etc.? But they also have a tendency of assuming that first that whenever it's convenient, they say science doesn't know everything. But then
Sure.
it is convenient. They say science proved this.
Same thing. So that's a rhetorical strategy, a narrative
Yeah.
strategy that's used extensively in ancient apocalypse. And that's a classic one. Is dark energy God? Right? That's a good question.
I
The
haven't heard
problem
that. I
is,
just made that up.
right. The problem is how do you evaluate it?
Yeah.
If you make that statement, that's a statement that you made. Okay, good. I want to evaluate the statement because I'm a scientist. I'm not equipped to evaluate it at the moment. I have no way to evaluate it. So am I going to conclude that it's true because I have no way to evaluate it? No,
No.
I'm going to conclude that I have no way to evaluate it. I'm going to
Exactly.
conclude agnosticism is also a popular position in archaeology.
Yeah, that's a good position to have, though. Now, next up, oh boy. Okay, so couldn't the eye of the Sahara be Atlantis?
Could it? Yeah. So again, we get to the question, could it be? Right?
Yeah, I'll
Could it be? Is it possible? As always, the answer in archaeology, when the question, is it possible? The answer is, sure, it's possible, but. So first you have to define, what do you mean by Atlantis? Like, what is Atlantis? What are you looking for exactly? If you're thinking of Atlantis as the lost Ice Age civilization that Graham Hancock posits, which he also refers to in, I think, the first episode, he says, basically, I'm talking about Atlantis, but I'm calling it something else. Sure, it's possible, but where's the evidence? And do we need to conclude that it's true? No, there are other possible explanations that are much simpler and that requires fewer assumptions. And again, if you look there archaeologically, you don't find Atlantis. So where's so that means all evidence of Atlantis was wiped out by the asteroid again. So that makes it an untestable hypothesis, which is either convenient or unfortunate, depending on your perspective. If you're Graham Hancock, it's convenient. If you're me, it's unfortunate because I can't test it and I would really like to.
Yeah, and of course, the artwork that I've usually seen, I haven't really dug into the eye of the Sahara, but it seems to be a rock formations which are in a concentric circle. Now, I don't know how exactly they were formed, but they do
Right.
match up to a hypothetical painting of what Atlantis might have looked like.
Sure. Description, which is mostly, I think, I'm not sure if that description comes mostly from Plato, from Critias, or if it comes mostly from Francis Bacon's later kind of elaboration of it, but I don't know. Jason Colavito has a very good blog where he goes into all that, and you can look at that. I'm sure he has extensive explanations about that on his blog.
If you could share that link with me, if you can find it.
Absolutely. I will. Great blog. Here's another thing, concentric circles in rock, right? That's another feature of Ancient Apocalypse and other like series that has to be addressed. So in the episode on the Bimini Road, for example, I think it's 4th episode or something, I don't know. So they have one of their experts say on camera that nature doesn't make right angles. So yeah, nature makes all kinds of angles. Nature definitely does make right angles. I mean, crystals, if you look at crystals, you're gonna get plenty of angles. So nature makes all kinds of geometrical shapes, circles, spheres. It makes cubes. It makes all kinds of shapes. And so when you see something in nature that is a geometrical form, a regular geometrical form, that doesn't necessarily mean aliens, because nature does produce those shapes. And so I think it's a little bit disingenuous. There isn't much, I have to say, that is completely disingenuous in Ancient Apocalypse. I mean, Graham Hancock I'd say he's sophisticated. He's certainly as a narrator, as a storyteller.
Absolutely.
He's definitely sophisticated, more so than your average pseudo-archaeology presenter.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of things that are a little bit disingenuous in there that they left in the series, and that's one of them. That to me, that's a screamer. Nature doesn't make right angles. Okay, come back to me. You've done a little bit of reading on Wikipedia about geology, and then we'll talk again.
Yeah, because there are so many hexagons and pentagons and
Everywhere.
all rock formations everywhere. It's that one did kind of stick out to me, but then I didn't think anything because I was like, I don't know enough about nature to really make a claim on that one.
If you look outside of your window, you can probably tell right away, because there are fantastic shapes in nature all over the place. So.
Indeed.
We live on a spheroid,
Right?
We live on a spheroid. So
yeah.
That's a shape right there.
Exactly. And there's one which is a little bit outside both our wheelhouses, but this is an interesting one. Are the gods of religion aliens? They could be.
So, of course, that's a very old idea.
Yeah. And I used to believe it. I used to think that would be a plausible explanation.
Okay, so there's a difference between plausible and possible, and et cetera, et cetera. Likely.
Plausible.
So that goes back to the modern wave of pseudo-archaeology. Really starts with the publication of Chariots of the Gods by Van Deniken.
Yeah.
And the making of the 1973, I believe, Rod Serling special In Search of Aliens, which was a television program, television documentary.
Yeah, I think I've heard of it.
Became the series In Search of. And that was really the first time that this idea got massive media play of gods being aliens and or aliens being gods. I don't know, one or the other. And there are lots of versions of that since then.
Yeah, even Star Trek explored that in several.
Popular theme in science fiction.
Yeah.
My personal favorite science fiction series, Space 1999, also has an episode about that, and that's an old British series from the 1970s. But
Nice.
for my generation, I guess. Again, my reaction to that is that's an interesting claim. How do I evaluate that claim? And do I need to posit that in order to explain what I observe in human prehistory? And I don't need to posit that. It could be true, but I don't need to invoke that in order to explain what I see in the archaeological record. And I have no evidence that it's true. So I'm going to keep it on the on the far back burner. If ever evidence came up that shows that it's true, I'd be totally receptive to it. There's no reason for me to think that it's false, let's just say. But there's currently no reason for me to think that it's true, and there's no reason for me to invoke it in order to explain the archaeological record as I can observe it. So yeah, could be.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, a lot of the ancient gods, whether it was Greek or Roman or pagan or even the Hindu gods, a lot of the original older ones were gods of creation and death, and elemental gods of fire, of thunder, of lightning, of water, of the sun god, and of the probably moon god as well. And so,
or of jealousy and anger and war and all that stuff. Yeah. All that
exactly.
human stuff.
These are
So
none of these really need aliens. These are all a part of the human experience that they were ascribing certain sentience to.
Yep. And that is, I would say, that is a sufficient explanation.
Yeah.
So I don't need more of an explanation at the moment in the current state of the evidence and my knowledge. If there's a new piece of evidence that comes up, then of course I will reevaluate that. But at the moment, I don't need to conclude that the gods are aliens or gods. It's sufficient. It's a sufficient explanation to look at humans and how we try to make sense of our world around us, and the kinds of explanations that we produce to sometimes to reassure ourselves and sometimes to comfort ourselves, and those are widespread all around the world. Again, it comes back to that whole explanation, right? When you put similar humans in Earth environments with similar challenges, they're going to come up with similar solutions, some of which is ascribing sentience and intentionality to features of nature or to even to human processes like war.
Indeed, absolutely. And finally, the last question that we have, does archaeology consider, I think we've already kind of touched on this, but it'll be nice to kind of wrap things up with.
Yeah.
Does archaeology consider any other macro contextual ideas, such as attention to stars, alignments, similar features in different geographies and continents, which we've already
covered? All the time.
Let's wrap it up.
We do all the time consider that because it's a big part of the human experience. So the sky, I just think about the places where I work, which are mostly northern. Just think about the aurora borealis, right? The northern lights, huge part of people's experience. For 6 months of the year in some places, the sky is dark and there are northern lights all the time. So people, of course, have stories about that, and there's rock art about it, and there's all kinds of stuff. And then in some other places, it's the sun that's important, and what's the sun up to, and where is it when, and when do we plant our crops, and when do we decide to do this ritual, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we consider that all the time. The problem starts when you get into situations where you have many elements on the ground, like the mounds at Poverty Point, that you're trying to match with many elements in the sky. And then your probabilities multiply for chance alignments. How do you then determine whether an alignment is by chance or is intentional? And at some point, it becomes impossible to determine. So yeah, it could be aligned with some star, or maybe not. Who knows? But in some cases, it's quite clear that alignments are very likely to be intentional.
Right. And actually, when you were talking, I just remembered another aspect of the show, which was the underground layers, the cave network under the ground, where Well, in the case of a global flood, that would be the stupidest place to kind of build a
That would not be a great place, no.
but he posits that they go extreme. They're probably very old. They have found absolutely no sources of carbon dating. Of course, there are many
Mhm.
other forms of dating. But what do you know about that cave complex? What does
So
the archaeology talk about?
I was really struck by a passage in that episode when Graham Hancock is talking to one of the local archaeologists, and I don't remember his name. He's a professor in Turkey. And the professor just explained that, yeah, they're built probably starting in the Bronze Age or something. And I don't remember the details, but and they were built as living quarters and the probably also to deal with local invaders, wars, and things like that. And then Graham Hancock says, yeah, but how do you know that they're not 12,000 years old and that they're not this and that? And he kind of looks like you can see the look on his face for like a second. He pauses and he reacts exactly how I would react. And he says, well, I don't know, but I'm giving you the most likely explanation.
Most plausible. Yeah, he did say
Based
that.
on giving you the most plausible, most likely, based on the evidence available to us, based on what we know. So I don't know that what you're saying is wrong, but I know that what I'm saying is likely to be true. So it's that to me sums up the whole thing about ancient apocalypse and things like it.
Very
So that's
interesting.
a good summation. That's a good wrap up, I think.
Yeah, that is. While I was watching it, I don't know archaeology as a study, so I'm not sure what was the real evidence that he actually provided. He did give that baseline of what archaeologists have found in that area, and then he goes
Sure.
into his stories. But I found that a lot of the evidence that he provides is more circumstantial. I don't, just correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure. Oh, you're right.
And most of it is just confirmation bias, arguments from incredulity. Like he's like, I can't imagine why somebody would make the, or and even emotional, where he went up to the other Tepe site, and he said that hall, that place we found it, I found it very ominous and very sinister.
Mhm.
And that kind of, he says that this is just my emotions being there, but maybe there's a reason
Right,
why.
exactly. That is more in him than in the site. So we all react to traces of the past. I mean, I have my reactions. When I'm on an archaeological site for the first time, for example, or we're about to start working on one, you feel something because it's a place where people lived and had children and died and went about their daily lives for a long time, sometimes for 2,000 years, 3,000 years or more. And there's so much experience there, and you feel something when you're there. And there's some of the archaeological sites that I've worked on, I know a lot more about them than I can prove. So internally, like my reactions, my feelings at being there, what I see in the ground, and like I know these places and I know what happened there, but I can only prove a very small amount of it. So when I'm writing when I'm writing papers and I'm publishing them, or I'm giving talks in a museum or something, I stick to what I can actually demonstrate. And then I might go off a little bit on some of my feelings, but I make it clear that, okay, now I'm close my PowerPoint presentation and this is not my graphs anymore. And this is not what I can demonstrate to you. This is now like what I feel. And it's very important to be transparent about that. And some of what you feel drives some of the hypotheses that you come up with. So, and that's not wrong. That's not a problem. But what matters is what you do with the hypotheses. How do you evaluate them? How do you work on them? So the part of coming up with ideas, that's the easy part, the fun part of science. And it's, everybody can participate in that, absolutely. And I welcome them. And people send me emails all the time saying, hey, I have this idea. Great, fantastic. How do we evaluate it? Because that's the science part. That's the part that we're trained for and that we work at.
Wonderful. Now, this has been such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much.
But I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot as well. So it's great.
And I was a guy who started off thinking ancient tech and ancient aliens were legit to a certain point. And one of the first stumbling blocks when I was studying in university, the people who are watching this video who know me will have heard this story a million times. But so my tutor gave me this concept for a sci-fi novel, which is, I love science fiction. I read nothing but science fiction. I watch nothing but science fiction. So he said, why don't you write a story where it's a first contact story with aliens, but the aliens are human? And
Oh yeah.
oh, interesting. So he's like, they've developed technology to leave the planet and they've occupied a different planet, and now you're meeting human beings. So it's like Star Trek, but it's uncanny because this is not supposed to happen.
Yep.
And I thought that was great, but I was like, this kind of conforms to the stories I've been hearing since I was a kid and the kind of things that I would think that I would believe in, watching X-Files and watching Ancient Aliens and stuff like that. And then I got down to actually looking for archaeological evidence, and I found nothing. And
Of
that's
course.
was like, wait a second, something's wrong here. And if I was wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? And then,
Well,
avalanche.
that goes back to the idea of the importance of humility in archaeology and in historical science in general. Your idea about first contact being with other humans reminds me of this concept that if we ever develop faster than light travel, we will catch up with things like the Pioneer probe and the Voyager. We will catch up with the edge of our previous exploration and we will make contact with our old selves in a sense. So it's a cool concept.
Indeed. And hopefully someday we'll do, but I don't know how far the laws of physics will allow us to do that. But Dr. Costopoulos, I am pronouncing that right. I know it's a little late in the day to ask that, right?
There's many different ways of pronouncing it in different languages, and that's fine. All of them are good.
How would you say it?
In English, it's Costopoulos, yes.
Costopoulos. So otherwise, it's a Greek origin name, I assume?
Greek origin, yeah. I'm Francophone myself. I'm originally from Montreal. But my family, my grandfather came from Greece.
I see. I love Greek food. And I love We'll try and find, if I ever come down to Canada, I'll definitely drop by and we can head out to some.
Absolutely, yes. If you're ever in the area, Edmonton, let me know.
Will do. Thank you so much for joining us on Rationable Interviews. This has been incredibly enlightening. And thank you so much for joining us. Guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been so amazing. And I hope I've asked a lot of the questions that you guys have been thinking, even if you haven't sent them in yet. If there are a lot more questions, put them in the comments and I'll be sure to get Dr. Costopoulos back on the show.
We'll look at them for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And if I can share them with him. He might be able to answer them in the comments themselves, or we'll just have him on for another episode of everything you wanted to know about ancient civilizations.
Okay.
Great. Thanks a ton. Everybody, please subscribe. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. And press that bell if you want more like this every single week. Until then, see you later.